All right, let's jump right in. Today we're going to talk about a huge challenge in public health, but we're going to start in a really unexpected place, with a pretty brutal myth from ancient Greece. And you'll see how this ancient story is actually playing out right now in modern-day Nepal.
Okay, so let's get into it. This first part is all about a myth, a story about some, let's say, very questionable hospitality. But stick with me because it perfectly sets up the huge problem we're going to unpack today.
So in Greek mythology, there was this innkeeper, a guy named Procrustes.
And he had a special offer for tired travelers. He'd give them a place to crash for the night in his one-of-a-kind iron bed. But here's the catch. He had this one really wicked rule. You see, every single guest had to fit his bed perfectly, no exceptions. So if you were too short, he'd literally stretch you on a rack until you fit. And if you were too tall, well, you can probably guess. He'd chop off your legs, just like that.
So this absolutely brutal story gives us a really powerful word, Procrusteanism. And what it means is basically any attempt to force something, or someone, to fit into a pre-made, arbitrary standard. Cramming all sorts of complex, diverse things into one rigid, one-size-fits-all box. And as you can imagine, that usually has some pretty damaging consequences.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. A gruesome Greek myth? What on earth does that have to do with anything today? Well, stick with me because we're about to see how this very same idea, this forced, damaging fit, is actually a modern reality for the public health system in Nepal.
So let's shift gears and head to Nepal. Now, in our story, Nepal is the traveler, and this traveler is defined by just an incredible, astounding amount of diversity.
I mean, just look at this. We're talking about a country with three totally distinct ecological zones. You've got the towering Himalayas, the rolling hills, and the flat Terai Plains. It's home to over 125 different ethnic and caste groups. Plus, you have these extreme geographical barriers that make travel tough, and this incredibly rich, centuries-old history of traditional medicine. It's anything but uniform.
So what happened to that rich, diverse tradition? Well, this slide basically tells a tale of two systems. You've got the before and the after. Before 1951, healthcare was this pluralistic mix of local practices, things like Ayurveda and shamanism. But after 1951, something totally new arrived. A standardized, Western biomedical model, pushed forward by international donors. It was a massive change.
And this timeline really breaks down how that shift went down. It all kicks off in 1951. The old Rana regime falls, and the very first U.S. aid grant comes in, bringing those Western models with it. Then you fast forward to the 80s, and all the way through the 2000s, this is when donor influence just explodes, really shaping national policy from the outside. But then, in 2015, something big happens. A new constitution brings in federalism, which, just maybe, offers a way out from all that centralized control.
Okay, so let's bring it back to our myth. What does this iron bed, this one-size-fits-all trap, actually look like on the ground for people in Nepal? Well, as it turns out, the effects are felt absolutely everywhere, from how research gets done to what happens in a tiny clinic in a remote village.
So the problem really starts with the data itself, how information is even gathered. Check out this quote. Standardized research methods can create something called epistemic pollution. That's a fancy term, but what it means is this. You take a super complex social problem and you reduce it to an individual's knowledge deficit. Basically, you end up blaming people for not knowing enough instead of looking at the real massive barriers they face, like poverty, caste discrimination, or just where they live.
And if you want to understand the scale of this external influence, just look at this number, 50%. At its peak, fully half of Nepal's entire health budget came from foreign aid. Now, let that sink in. When half your funding comes from the outside, with its own set of priorities, well, that's inevitably going to shape your entire national agenda.
And this is where the rubber really meets the road. This is the crucial point. When you force one single policy on a super diverse country, it just breaks. For example, supply chains that are designed for flat plains, they completely fail in the mountains. Global nutrition advice, it clashes with local diets and what people need at high altitudes. COVID lockdowns designed for cities, they totally ignored how rural economies work. Even the medical schools were creating doctors with a standardized curriculum that left them completely unprepared for the reality of working in rural Nepal.
Okay, so let's be fair here. This standardized approach wasn't all bad. It's not just a simple story of failure. There were some real benefits. But, and this is a big but, those benefits came with some really significant and often overlooked costs. So let's weigh the pros and cons.
On the one hand, yes, uniformity brought some real gains. It absolutely helped Nepal hit some big global targets, like bringing down maternal and child mortality rates. And it made scaling up huge campaigns, like for vaccines, much easier. But then you look at the other side of the ledger, the pains, and they were profound. It actually made inequities worse between rural and urban areas, it eroded local trust in the official health system, and it created this massive dependency on foreign aid.
So the big question is, how does Nepal break free from this trap? How does it escape the iron bed and find a system that actually fits its people? Right now, the country is at this really critical crossroads, and it's searching for that exact answer.
And a big piece of that hope lies in this idea of federalism. So the 2015 Constitution did something huge. It decentralized power, giving it to 753 local governments. Now, on paper, this is the perfect antidote to the Procrustean bed, right? It empowers local communities to actually shape health policies to fit their needs, instead of just taking orders from a centralized government far away.
This new approach opens the door to a really powerful idea. Not a universal one-size-fits-all system, but a pluriversal one. And what that means is you don't throw out modern medicine, not at all. Instead, you create a hybrid. You take the best of biomedical science and you blend it with local knowledge, local culture, and local realities. The goal isn't one perfect solution. It's about creating many different solutions that actually work. Which of course leaves us with the million-dollar question. After so many decades of relying on that single rigid model, is a new political structure actually enough to break those old habits? Can Nepal really, truly dismantle that old iron bed and finally build a health system that fits all of its people, just as they are?